Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be reading more of the Nutcracker and the Mouse King. I hope you enjoyed the first part of this series, and I hope you'll enjoy this one too. So here we go. We must now explain that in the living room, on the left hand as you go in, there stands against the wall a high glass-fronted cupboard, where all the children's Christmas presents are yearly put away to be kept. Louisa, the elder sister, was still quite little when her father had this cupboard constructed by a very skilful workman, who had put in it such transparent panes of glass, and altogether made the whole affair so splendid, that the things, when inside it, looked almost more shining and lovely than when one had them actually in one's hands. In the upper shelves, which were beyond reach of Fritz and Marie, were stowed Godpapa Drosselmeyer's works of art. Immediately under them was the shelf for the picture books. Fritz and Marie were allowed to do what they liked with the two lower shelves, but it always came about that the lower one of all was that in which Marie put away her dolls as their place of residence, whilst Fritz utilized the shelf above this as cantonments for all his troops of all arms. So that on the evening as which we are speaking, Fritz had quartered his hussars in the upper shelf of these two, whilst Marie had put Miss Gertrude rather in a corner, established her new doll in the well-appointed chamber there, with all of its appropriate furniture, and invited herself to tea and cakes with her. This chamber was splendidly furnished, everything on a first-rate scale, and in good and admirable style, as I have already said. But I don't know if you, my observant reader, have the satisfaction of possessing an equally well-appointed room for your dolls, a little beautifully flowered sofa, a number of the most charming little chairs, a nice little tea table, and above all, a beautiful little white bed where your pretty darling of dolls go to sleep. All this was in a corner of the shelf, the walls of which in this part had beautiful little pictures hanging on them. You may well imagine that, in such a delightful chamber as this, the new doll, whose name, as Marie had discovered, was Miss Clara, thought herself extremely comfortably settled and remarkably well off. It was getting late, not so very far from midnight, indeed, before the children could tear themselves away from all these Yuletide fascinations, and Godpapa Drosselmeyer had been gone a considerable time. They remained riveted beside the glass cupboard, although their mother several times reminded them that it was long after bedtime. "Yes," said Fritz, "I know well enough that these poor fellows," meaning his hussars, "are tired enough, and awfully anxious to turn in for the night. Though as long as I'm here, not a man jack of them dares to nod his head." With which he went off. But Marie earnestly begged for just a little while longer, saying that she had such a number of things to see to, and promising that as soon as ever she had got them all settled, she would go to bed at once. Marie was a very good and reasonable child, and therefore her mother allowed her to remain for a little longer with her playthings. But lest she should be much too occupied with her new doll and other playthings as to forget to put out the candles which were lighted all round on the wall sconces, she herself put them all out, leaving merely the lamp which hung from the ceiling to give a soft and pleasant light. "Come soon to your bed, Marie, or you'll never be up in time in the morning," cried her mother as she went away into the bedroom. As soon as Marie was alone, she set rapidly to work to do the one thing which was chiefly at her heart to accomplish, and which, though she scarcely knew why, she somehow did not like to set about in her mother's presence. She had been holding Nutcracker wrapped in the handkerchief carefully in her arms all this time, and she now laid him softly down on the table, gently unrolled the handkerchief, and examined his wounds. Nutcracker was very pale, but at the same time he was smiling with a melancholy and pathetic kindness that went straight to Marie's heart. "Oh, my darling little Nutcracker," said she very softly, "don't you be vexed because Brother Fritz has hurt you so. He didn't mean it, you know. He's only a little bit hardened with his soldiering and that, but he's a good nice boy, I can assure you. And I'll take the greatest care of you and nurse you till you're quite better and happy again. And your teeth shall be put in again for you, and your shoulder set right. Godpapa Drosselmeyer will see to that. He knows how to do things of the kind. Marie could not finish what she was going to say, because at the mention of Godpapa Drosselmeyer, friend Nutcracker made a most horrible, ugly face. A sort of green sparkle of much sharpness seemed to dart out of his eyes. This was only for an instant, however, and just as Marie was going to be terribly frightened, she found that she was looking at the very same nice, kindly face, with the pathetic smile which she had seen before, and she saw plainly that it was nothing but some draught of air making the lamp flicker that had seemed to produce the change. "Well," she said, "I certainly am a silly girl to be so easily frightened, and think that a wooden doll could make faces at me. But I'm too fond, really, of Nutcracker, because he's so funny, and so kind and nice, and so he must be taken the greatest care of, and properly nursed till he's quite well." With which she took him in her arms again, approached the cupboard, and kneeling down beside it, said to her new doll, "I'm going to ask a favour of you, Miss Clara, that you will give up your bed to this poor, sick, wounded Nutcracker, and make yourself as comfortable as you can on the sofa here. Remember that you're quite well and strong yourself, or you wouldn't have such fat red cheeks, and that there are very few dolls indeed who have as comfortable a sofa as this to lie upon." Miss Clara, in her Christmas full dress, looked very grand and disdainful, and said not so much as "Muck." "Very well," said Marie. "Why should I make such a fuss and stand on any ceremony?" She took the bed and moved it forward, laid Nutcracker carefully and tenderly down on it, and wrapped another pretty ribbon taken from her own dress about his hurt shoulder, and drew the bedclothes up to his nose. "But he shan't stay with that nasty Clara," she said to herself, and moved to the bed with the Nutcracker in it up to the upper shelf, so that it was placed near the village in which Fritz's hussars had their cantonments. She closed the cupboard, and was moving away to go to bed, when, listen, children, there began a soft, low rustling and rattling, and a sort of whispering noise all around, in all directions, from all corners of the room, beyond the stove, under the chairs, beyond the cupboards. The clock on the wall warned louder and louder, but it could not strike. Marie looked at it, and saw that the big gilt owl which was on the top of it had drooped its wings so that they covered the whole of the clock, and it stretched its cat-like head with the crooked beak a long way forward, and the warning kept growing louder and louder, with distinct words: "Clocks, clocky, stop ticking, no sound but cautious warning. Mousie's ears are fine, prr, prr. Only sing poom, poom, sing the olden song of doom. Prr, prr, poom, poom, bells go chime. Soon rings out the fated time." And then came poom, poom, quite hoarsely and smothered, 12 times. Marie grew terribly frightened, and was going to rush away as best she could, when she noticed that Godpapa Drosselmeyer was up on the top of the clock, instead of the owl, with his yellow coat-tails hanging down on both sides, like wings. But she manned herself, and called out in a loud voice of anguish, "Godpapa! Godpapa! What are you up there for? Come down to me, and don't frighten me so terribly, you naughty, naughty Godpapa Drosselmeyer." But then there begun a sort of wild kickering and squeaking everywhere all about, and presently there was a sound as of running and trotting, as of thousands of little feet behind the walls, and thousands of little lights began to glitter out between the chinks of the woodwork. But they were not lights. No, no. Little glittering eyes, and Marie became aware that everywhere mice were peeping and squeezing themselves out through every chink. Presently they were trotting and galloping in all directions over the room, orderly bodies, continually increasing, of mice, forming themselves into regular troops and squadrons, in good order, just as Fritz's soldiers did when maneuvers were going on. as Marie was not afraid of mice as many children are. She could not help being amused by this, and her first alarm had nearly left her when suddenly there came such a sharp and terrible piping noise that the blood ran cold in her veins. Ah, what did she see then? Well, truly, kind reader, I know that your heart is in the right place, just as much as my friend Field Marshal Fritz's is itself. But if you had seen what now came before Marie's eyes, you would have made a clean pair of heels for it. Nay, I consider that you would have plumped into your bed, and drawn the blankets further over your head than necessity demanded. But poor Marie hadn't in her power to do any such thing, because right at her feet, as if impelled by some subterranean power, sand and lime and broken stone came bursting up, and then 7 mouse heads, with 7 shining crowns upon them, rose to the floor, hissing and piping in a most horrible way. Quickly, the body of the mouse, which had those 7 crowned heads, forced its way up through the floor, and this enormous creature shouted, with its 7 heads, aloud to the assembled multitude, squeaking to them with all the 7 mouths in full chorus. And then the entire army set itself in motion, and went trot, trot, right up to the cupboard, and in fact to Marie, who was standing beside it. Marie's heart had been beating so with terror that she had thought it must jump out of her breast, and she must die. But now it seemed to her as if the blood in her veins stood still. Half fainting, she leant backwards, and there was a "Grr-grr-grr," and the pane of the cupboard, which she had broken with her elbow, fell in shivers to the floor. She felt for a moment a sharp stinging pain in her arm, but still this seemed to make her heart lighter, and she heard no more of the quaking and piping. Everything was quiet, and though she didn't dare to look, she thought the noise of the glass breaking had frightened the mice back to their holes. But what came to pass then? Right behind Marie, a movement seemed to commence in the cupboard, and small, faint voices began to be heard, saying, "Come awake, measures take, out to the fight, out to the fight, shield the right, arm and away, this is the night," and harmonica bells began ringing as prettily as you please. "Oh, that's my little peal of bells," cried Marie, and went nearer and looked in. Then she saw that there was bright light in the cupboard, and everything busily in motion there, dolls and little figures of various kinds all running about together, and struggling with their little arms. At this point, Nutcracker rose from his bed, cast off the bedclothes, and sprang with both feet onto the floor of the shelf, crying out at the top of his voice, "Knack, knack, knack, stupid mousy pack! All their skulls will crack, mousy pack! Knack, knack, mousy pack! Crick and crack, cowardly lot of snack!" And with this he drew his little sword, waved it in the air, and cried, "Ye my trusty vassals, brethren and friends, are ye ready to stand by me in this great battle?" Immediately 3 scaramouches, 1 pantaloon, 4 chimney sweeps, 2 zither players, and a drummer cried in either accents, "Yes, your highness, we will stand by you in loyal duty. We will follow you to the death, the victory, and to the fray." And they precipitated themselves after Nutcracker, who in the excitement of the moment had dared that perilous leap to the bottom shelf. Now, they might well dare this perilous leap, for not only had they got plenty of clothes on of cloth and silk, but besides there was not much in their insides except cotton and sawdust, so they plumped down like little wool sacks. But as for poor Nutcracker, he would certainly have broken his arms and legs, for, bethink you, he was nearly 2 feet from where he had stood to the shelf below, and his body was as fragile as if he had been made of elm wood. Yes, Nutcracker would have broken his arms and legs had not Miss Clara started up at the moment of his spring from her sofa, and received the hero drawn sword and all in her tender arms. "Oh, you dear good Clara!" cried Marie. "How did I misunderstand you? I believe you were quite willing to let dear Nutcracker have your bed." But now Miss Clara cried, as she pressed the young hero gently to her silken breast, "Oh, my lord, go not into this battle in danger, sick and wounded as you are. See how your trusty vassals, clowns and pantaloon, chimney sweeps, zithermen and drummer, are already arrayed below, and the puzzle figures in my shelf here are in motion and preparing for the fray. Deign then, O my lord, to rest in these arms of mine, and contemplate your victory from a safe coign of vantage." Thus spoke Clara. But Nutcracker behaved so impatiently and kicked so with his legs that Clara was obliged to put him down on the shelf in a hurry. However, he at once sank gracefully on one knee and expressed himself as follows: "O lady, your kind protection and aid which you have afforded me will ever be presents to my heart, in battle and victory." On this, Clara bowed herself so as to be able to take hold of him by his arms, raised him gently up, quickly loosened her girdle, which was ornamented with many spangles, and would have placed it about his shoulders. But the little man drew himself swiftly 2 steps back, laid his hand upon his heart, and said with much solemnity, "O lady, do not bestow this mark of your favor upon me, for—" He hesitated, gave a deep sigh, took the ribbon with which Marie had bound him from his shoulders, pressed it to his lips, put it on as cognizance for the fight, and, waving his shoulders, pressed it to his lips. Oh, I literally reread the line I just read, and waving his glittering sword, sprang like a bird over the ledge of the cupboard down to the floor. You will observe, kind reader, that Nutcracker, even before he really came to life, had felt and understood all Marie's goodness and regard, and that it was because of his gratitude and devotion to her that he would not take or wear even a ribbon of Miss Clara's, even though it was exceedingly pretty and charming. This good, true-hearted Nutcracker preferred Marie's much commoner and more unpretending token. What is going to happen further now? At the moment the Nutcracker sprang down, quaking and piping commenced again worse than ever. Alas, under the big table the hordes of the mouse army had taken up a position densely massed under the command of the terrible mouse of the 7 heads. So what is to be the result? "Beat the General, trusty vassal drummer!" cried the Nutcracker very loud. And immediately the drummer began to roll his drum in the most splendid style, so that the windows of the glass cupboard rattled and resounded. Then there began a cracking and a clattering inside, and Marie saw all the lids of the boxes in which Fritz's army was quartered bursting open, and the soldiers all came out and jumped down to the bottom shelf, where they formed up in good order. Nutcracker hurried up and down the ranks, speaking words of encouragement. "There's not a dog of a trumpeter taking the trouble to sound a call," he cried in a fury. Then he turned to the pantaloon, who was looking decidedly pale, and, wobbling his long chin a good deal, said in a tone of solemnity, "I know how brave and experienced you are, General. What is essential here is rapid comprehension of the situation and immediate utilization of the passing moment. I entrust you the command of the cavalry and artillery. You could do without a horse, for your legs are long, and you could gallop on them as fast as is necessary. Do your duty." Immediately Pantaloon put his long, lean fingers to his mouth, and gave such a piercing crow that it rang as if 100 little trumpets had been sounding lustily. Then there began a tramping and a neighing in the cupboard, and Fritz's dragoons and cuirassiers, but above all the new glittering hussars, marched out, and then came to a halt, drawn up on the floor. They then marched past Nutcracker by regiments, with guidons flying and bands playing, upon which they wheeled into line and formed up at right angles to the line of march. Upon this, Fritz's artillery came rattling up, and formed action front and advance of the halted cavalry. Then went boom, boom, and Marie saw the sugar plums doing terrible execution amongst the thickly massed mouse battalions, which were powdered quite white by them, and greatly put to shame. But a battery of heavy guns, which had taken up a strong position on Mama's footstool was what did the greatest execution, and boom, 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 kept up a murderous fire of gingerbread nuts into the enemy's ranks with most destructive effect, mowing the mice down in great numbers. The enemy, however, was not materially checked in his advance, and had even possessed himself of one or two of the heavy guns, when there came and Marie could scarcely see what was happening for smoke and dust, but this much is certain, that every corps engaged fought with the utmost bravery and determination, and for a long time it was doubtful which side would gain the day. The mice kept on developing fresh bodies of their forces, and as they were advanced to the scene in action, their little silver balls, like pills in size, which they delivered with great precision, their musketry practice being specially fine, took effect even inside the glass cupboard. Clara and Gertrude ran up and down in utter despair, wringing their hands, and loudly lamenting, "Must I, the very loveliest doll in all the world, perish miserably in the very flower of my youth?" cried Miss Clara. "Oh, was it for this," wept Gertrude, "that I have taken such pains to conserve her myself all these years? Must I be shot here in my own drawing-room after all?" On this they fell into each other's arms, and howled so terribly that you could hear them above all the din of the battle. For you have no idea of the hurly-burly that went on now, dear auditor. It went boom, 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 all confusedly and higgledy-piggledy, and the Mouse King and the mice squeaked and screamed, and then again Nutcracker's powerful voice is heard shouting words of command and issuing important orders, and he is seen striding along amongst his battalions in the thick of the fire. Pantaloon had made several most brilliant cavalry charges, and covered himself with glory, but Fritz's hussars were subjected by the mice to a heavy fire of very evil-smelling shot, which made horrid spots on their red tunics. This caused them to hesitate and hang rather back for a time. Pantaloon made them take ground to the left and Echelon, and in the excitement of the moment he, with his dragoons and cuirassiers, executed a somewhat analogous movement. That is to say, they brought up the right shoulder, wheeled to the left, and marched home to their quarters. Tins had the effect of bringing the battery of artillery on the footstool into imminent danger, and it was not long before a large body of exceedingly ugly mice delivered such a vigorous assault on this position that the whole of the footstool with the guns and gunners fell into the enemy's hands. Nutcracker seemed much disconcerted, and ordered his right wing to commence a retrograde movement. A soldier of your experience, my dear Fritz, knows well that such a movement is almost tantamount to a regular retreat, and you grieve with me in anticipation for the disaster which threatens the army of Marie's beloved little Nutcracker. Turn your glance in the other direction, and look at this left wing of Nutcracker's, where all is still going well, and you will see that there is yet much hope for the commander-in-chief and his cause. During the hottest part of the engagement, masses of mouse cavalry had been quietly debouching from under the chest of drawers, and had subsequently made a most determined advance upon the left wing of Nutcracker's force, uttering loud and horrible squeakings. But what a reception they met with! Very slowly, as the nature of the terrain necessitated, for the ledge at the bottom of the cupboard had to be passed, the regiment of model figures, commanded by 2 Chinese emperors, advanced, and formed square. These fine, brilliantly uniformed troops, consisting of gardeners, Tyrolese, Tungouses, hairdressers, harlequins, Cupids, lions, tigers, unicorns, and monkeys fought with the utmost courage, coolness, and steady endurance. This battalion elite would have wrested the victory from the enemy had not one of the cavalry captains, pushing forward with a rash and foolhardy manner, made a charge upon one of the Chinese emperors and bitten off his head. This Chinese emperor in his fall knocked over and smothered a couple of tunguses and a unicorn, and this created a gap through which the enemy effected a rush, which resulted in the whole battalion being bitten to death. But the enemy gained little advantage by this, for as soon as one of the mouse cavalry soldiers bit one of these brave adversaries to death, he found that there was a small piece of printed paper sticking in his throat, of which he died in a moment. Still, this was of small advantage to Nutcracker's army, which, having once commenced a retrograde movement, went on retreating farther and farther, suffering greater and greater loss, so that the unfortunate Nutcracker found himself driven back close to the front of the cupboard with a very small remnant of his army. "Bring up the reserves! Pantaloon! Scaramouche! Drummer! Where the devil have you got to?" shouted Nutcracker, who was still reckoning on reinforcements from the cupboard. And there did, in fact, advance a small contingent of brown gingerbread men and women, with gilt faces, hats, and helmets. But they laid about them so clumsily that they never hit any of the enemy, and soon knocked off the cap of their commander-in-chief, Nutcracker himself. And the enemy's chasseurs soon bit their legs off so that they tumbled topsy-turvy, and killed several of Nutcracker's companions and arms into the bargain. Nutcracker was now hard pressed and closely hemmed in by the enemy, and in a position of extreme peril. He tried to jump the bottom ledge of the cupboard, but his legs were not long enough. Clara and Gertrude had fainted, so they could give him no assistance. Hussars and heavy dragoons came charging up at him, and he shouted in wild despair, "A horse! A horse! My kingdom for a horse!" At this moment, two of the enemy's riflemen seized him by his wooden cloak, and the king of the mice went rushing up to him, squeaking in triumph out of all his 7 throats. Marie could contain herself no longer. "Oh, my poor Nutcracker!" she sobbed, and took her left shoe off, without very distinctly knowing what it was about, and threw it as hard as she could into the thick of the enemy, straight at their king. Instantly, everything vanished and disappeared. All was silence, nothing to be seen, but Marie felt a more stinging pain than before in her left arm, and fell on the floor, insensible. When Marie awoke from a death-like sleep, she was lying in her little bed, and the sun was shining brightly in at the window, which was all covered with frost flowers. There was a stranger gentleman sitting beside her, whom she recognized as Dr. Wendelstern. "She's awake," he said softly, and her mother came and looked at her very scrutinizingly and anxiously. "Oh, mother," whispered Marie, Are all those horrid mice gone away? And is Nutcracker quite safe?" Don't talk such nonsense, Marie," answered her mother. "What have the mice got to do with Nutcracker? You're a very naughty girl, and have caused us all a great deal of anxiety. See how it comes of children not doing as they're told. You were playing with your toys so late last night that you fell asleep. I don't know whether or not some mice jumped out and frightened you, though there are no mice here generally. But, at all events, you broke a pane of the glass cupboard with your elbow, and cut your arm so badly that Dr. Wendelstern, who has just taken a number of pieces of the glass out of your arm, thinks that if it had only been a little higher up, that you might have had a stiff arm for life, or even bled to death. Thank heaven I awoke at about 11 o'clock and missed you, and I found you lying insensible in front of the glass cupboard, bleeding frightfully, with a number of Fritz's lead soldiers scattered round you, and other toys, broken model figures and gingerbread men, and Nutcrackers lying on your bleeding arm with your left shoe not far off." "Oh, mother, mother," said Marie, These were the remains of the tremendous battle between the toys and the mice, and what frightened me so terribly is that the mice were going to take Nutcracker, who was the commander-in-chief of the toy army, a prisoner. Then I threw my shoe in among the mice, and after that I know nothing more that happened." Dr. Findelstern gave a significant look at the mother, who said very gently to Marie, "Never mind, dear. Keep yourself quiet. The mice are all gone away, and the Nutcracker's in the cupboard, quite safe and sound." Here Marie's father came in and had a long consultation with Dr. Findelstern. Then he felt Marie's pulse, and she heard them talking about wound fever. She had to stay in bed and take medicine for some days, although she didn't feel at all ill, except that her arm was rather stiff and painful. She knew Nutcracker had got safe out of the battle, and she seemed to remember, as if in a dream, that he had said quite distinctly in a very melancholy tone, "Marie, deepest lady, I am deeply indebted to you, but it is in your power to do even more for me still." She thought and thought what this could possibly be, but in vain. She couldn't make it out. She wasn't able to play on account of her arm, and when she tried to read or look through the picture books, everything wavered before her eyes so strangely that she was obliged to stop. So the days seemed very long to her, and she could scarcely pass the time till evening, when her mother came and sat at her bedside, telling and reading her all sorts of nice stories. She just finished telling her the story of Prince Facardine, when the door opened, and in came Godpapa Drosselmeyer, saying, "I have come to see with my own eyes how Marie is getting on." When Marie saw Godpapa Drosselmeyer in his little yellow coat, the scene of the night when Nutcracker lost the battle with the mice came so vividly back to her that she couldn't help crying out, "Oh, Godpapa Drosselmeyer, how nasty you were! I saw you quite well when you were sitting on the clock, covering it all over with your wings to prevent it from striking and frightening the mice. I heard you quite well when you called to the Mouse King. Why didn't you help Nutcracker? Why didn't you help me, you nasty Godpapa? It's nobody's fault but yours that I'm laying here with a bad arm." Her mother, in much alarm, asked what she meant, but Drosselmeyer began making extraordinary faces, and said in a snarling tone, like a sort of chant in monotone, "Pendulums could only rattle, couldn't tick, ne'er a click. All the clockies stopped their ticking, no more clicking, then they all struck a loud cling clang. Dollies, don't your head down hang, hink and hank and honk and hank. Doll girls, don't your heads down hang, cling and ring, the battle's over, Nutcracker all safe in clover. Here comes the owl on downy wings, scares away the mouse's king. Pick and pack and pick and pook. Clocks bim boom, pendulums must click again. Tick and tack, curr and burr, prr and purr." Marie fixed wide eyes of terror upon Godpapa Drosselmeyer, because he was looking quite different, and far more horrid than usual, and was jerking his right arm backwards and forwards as if he were some puppet moved by a handle. She was beginning to grow terribly frightened at him when her mother came in, and Fritz, who had arrived in the meantime, laughed heartily, crying, "Why, Godpapa, you're going on funnily. You're just like my old jumping jack that I threw away last month." But the mother looked very grave, and said, "This is a most extraordinary way of going on, Mr. Drosselmeyer. What can you mean by it?" "My goodness," said Drosselmeyer, laughing, "did you never hear my nice watchmaker's song? I always sing it to little invalids like Marie." Then he hastened to sit down beside Marie's bed, and said to her, "Don't be vexed with me that I didn't gouge out all the Mouse King's 14 eyes. That couldn't be managed exactly. But, to make up for it, here's something which I know will please you greatly." Then he dived into one of its pockets, and what he slowly brought out of it was Nutcracker, whose teeth he had put in again quite firmly, and set his broken jaw completely to rights. Marie shouted for joy, and her mother laughed, and said, "Now you see for yourself how nice Godpapa Drosselmeyer is to Nutcracker." "But you must admit, Marie," said her godpapa, that Nutcracker's far from what you might call a handsome fellow. You can't say he has a pretty face. If you like, I'll tell you how it was that the ugliness came into his family. It has been handed down in it from one generation to another. Did ever you hear about the Princess Pirlipat, the witch Mousie-Rinks, and the clever clockmaker? I say, Godpapa Drosselmeyer, interrupted Fritz at this juncture, you've put Nutcracker's teeth in again, all right, but his jaw isn't as wobbly as it was. And what's become of his sword? Why haven't you given him a sword? Oh, said Drosselmeyer, annoyed. You must always be bothering and finding fault with something or other, boy. What have I to do with Nutcracker's sword? I've put his mouth to rights for him. He must look out for a sword for himself. Yes, yes, said Fritz. So he must, of course, if he's the right sort of fellow. So tell me, Marie, continued Drosselmeyer, if you know the story of Princess Pirlipat. Oh, no, said Marie. Tell it to me, please. Do tell it to me. I hope it won't be as strange and terrible as your stories generally are, said her mother. Oh, no, nothing of the kind, said Drosselmeyer. On the contrary, it's quite a funny story which I'm going to have the honor of telling this time. Go on, then. Do tell it to us, cried the children. And Drosselmeyer commenced as follows. But, for you and I, we will continue this story next time. And I hope you will return for that. Until next time, this has been Kurt.